Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Rejoining me on the podcast is Kamran Bokhari. He's the senior director of the Eurasian Security and Prosperity Portfolio at the New Lines Institute. I've been a colleague with Kamran in the past, and I'm also honored to call him a friend, and super appreciate him making time in what was, I'm sure, a very, very busy week for him to come and share his insights with us. Kamran is an expert in Iran, in Turkey, in the Muslim world, and he brings a lot of that analytical firepower in this conversation about what could happen beyond Israel and Gaza in this war that is unfolding. My email address is jacob@cognitive.investments if you want to talk about our research and consulting services, our wealth management services, or if you just want to give me recommendations about who should come on the podcast, or you have feedback about the podcast in general. Otherwise, I think that's all the programming notes I have. So hope you enjoy the episode. Cheers and see you out there. Kamran, I've been looking forward to chatting with you since we first emailed a couple of days ago. I wish it were under better circumstances. First of all, let me salute, if you're just listening to the podcast and you're not looking to it on YouTube, you do not have a view of Kamran's wonderful Star Trek The Next Generation dolls that are literally right behind his head. I really appreciate that. Good to see you, man.
It's actually a big book with everybody's face on it, so they're not dolls.
Oh, it looks like little dolls. Well, now people know what to get me for Hanukkah. You can get me little Next Generation dolls, and I'll be really, really happy.
Duly noted.
Well, you don't have to get me. You coming on the podcast is all I need for Hanukkah. Let's. Well, I don't know where you want to start. So we didn't. We're going to riff here. We've been doing this for a long time together, and you joked. As soon as we turned on the thing before we even hit the record button, here we are, another Israel-Gaza conflict. But this one feels a lot different. My first reaction was I wasn't thinking this was going to be a larger regional conflagration, and I'm still leaning that direction. But I also said at the beginning, some of this doesn't make sense, and Iran's role doesn't make sense in all of this, and there's a lot of weird stuff happening around that. And you have forgotten more about Iran than I will ever learn in a lifetime. So you were one of the first people I wanted to get to about that, and also to do our regional tour of the Middle East, and also to just think about this from a Muslim perspective as well. So I don't know how long we'll talk. We'll probably talk for a while, but let's start with, you were alluding before we hit the record button that you think this is bigger. So tell me why it's wrong to think this is just going to be an Israeli-Palestinian affair, and what you're concerned about vis-a-vis Iran.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you look at the scale of the attack, you see a marked difference in capabilities on the part of Hamas. We've had like 2 waves of Hamas violence. So from 1987, the first Intifada, to 2004, you had suicide bombings. That's what they were doing. It was day in and day out. Well, not exactly, but very frequent and very ferocious and inside proper Israel. That's what they knew how to do. Then the Mossad and IDF Intel penetrated them. And they eliminated the leadership. I don't know if you remember that. That was 2004. Mm-hmm. And they penetrated the machine that was putting together all these suicide bombers. So that tradecraft sort of, they lost that ability to pull those off. And then you had the unilateral withdrawal the following year. And for a few years, there was nothing going on because Hamas decided to join politics. It had hoped to dominate the government. It won the elections in 2006. But, a little over a year later, they basically just took over Gaza, and we had the intra-Palestinian civil war. And right about that time, like 2008, you see, what at that time surprised many, that where did they get this capability to fire rockets into Israel? This was something Hezbollah was known for, but not Hamas. And that set a new sort of normal, if you will, if I could use that word, where every few years you would have, a war where the Israelis would go in, mowing the lawn strategy and degrading Hamas's ability to fire rockets and, forcing a truce. And that was sort of the cadence, that was sort of the arrangement. And we saw multiple clashes over the years, and at least 4, if not 5 major battles or wars. Now, all of a sudden last Saturday, they've displayed something completely different. The ability to deploy 1,000 fighters, in broad daylight through the sea, through through land and even air, and go in and storm Israeli townships and kill 1,000 people. At least that's where the body count is right now. I suspect it will rise. And so now you had dealing with a new Hamas. And so the old strategy from the Israeli point of view, basically kicked the can down the road, and it didn't do anything. In fact, Hamas has grown stronger. It still has rockets, but it has this additional capability as well. And if you do not respond, then you're basically emboldening the other side. And by response, I don't mean what was happening between 2008 and until Saturday. I mean, go in and actually revisit perhaps even the decision to unilaterally withdraw. I wouldn't be surprised if this leads to a broader effort at regime change. I'm not forecasting it, but you have to think outside the box when you're in moments like that. That means that for some time, the IDF will have to reoccupy at least large parts of the Strip. It's not big to begin with, so we'll just have to wait and see with that. And then, of course, the question of Israeli intelligence failure. And that's the biggest thing here. The tradecraft is big, but it's still low tech, paragliders, motorcycles, bulldozers, et cetera, guns. That's not the big deal. The big deal is to be able to plan, plot, train, prepare, execute while remaining below the radar and not letting a whiff go out to an intelligence service that is known to capture these kind of things, that has a reputation to actually know what's happening inside Iran. And if you don't know what's happening in Gaza, then you begin to question your own intelligence, your entire strategy. So that's why I think this is going to be big. And lastly, before I pause, I have a hard time believing that Hamas, Iran, and Hezbollah prepared for all of this in the end to only let Hamas bear the brunt of an Israeli counteroffensive. So there's a reason why the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff basically said the other day that, hey, asking Iran to, stay out of this. And then there's, one carrier battle group already in the Eastern Med. And there's a consideration going on, at least according to the Wall Street Journal, that they may actually deploy a second one, although they may rotate out. But, that's sort of why I think this is way, way bigger than what we've seen before.
Yeah, the consideration of the second carrier battle group stopped me in my tracks. I mean, it's not quite enough to say that the thesis about it remaining an Israel-Hamas war is out. I mean, if you saw a third, then all bets are off, and I think you're exactly right. But, I sat up in my chair at the second carrier group. I think it's also, you took us through a little bit of history. I think it's important to remember that, yes, Hamas did win democratic elections in, what was that? I believe it was 05, 06.
06.
Yeah, and they were not allowed to govern. Everybody thought, we'll give them democracy. They will elect someone that will represent themselves. And then Hamas was the winner, and the world, including the United States, was like, well, no, like we didn't mean you could pick these guys. You got to pick somebody else. And I'm not sure that would have changed anything in the grand scheme of things. But the other part of what you're talking about here is also Ariel Sharon's government to unilaterally withdraw, which was very, very controversial at the time. I remember the protests about it in Israel. And it was really through Sharon's sheer force of personality and charisma that was even forced through. And of course, shortly thereafter, I think it was a stroke that he had, and he passed away. And Tzipi Livni was ahead for a while. Ehud Olmert, you go through that kind of. None of who had the force of personality and the charisma and the credentials of Sharon. And so Sharon never really got to take it to the next step. Like, disengagement from Gaza was supposed to be one step in his larger vision, I think, to secure Israel and think about relations with Israelis and the Palestinians. But because his health failed, we'll never know what his long-term plans were. And so Israel just sort of gets stuck in the mud and never moves forward. And as you say, they just get into this kicking the can down the road scenario. So funny how even, the smallest little things like a stroke from one political leader can also lead to these things in general.
Actually, it was huge. That whole incident was huge because I remember how footage of IDF soldiers basically forcibly removing settlers
Yes.
from the Strip. And the situation got so bad politically that, if you recall, Sharon and Zibi Livni and others had to leave Likud to form Kadima, if you remember, a center-right party, pragmatic conservative, in order to, maintain their position politically.
A party that does not exist anymore. I saw Zibi Livni give an interview on CNN, so apparently she's still making the rounds and talking to people, but none of those people still in politics. It was really Sharon. And Sharon also, we could do a whole podcast just on Sharon and what a fascinating person he was. And a ferocious general and military leader turned, and you're exactly right. Like the videos of IDF soldiers forcibly removing people from the Gaza Strip. That's something I haven't thought about in a long time. But as we're thinking now, playing it forward, you mentioned about the tradecraft for Hamas. And this is a back way of getting to the Iran question. I don't know how much of this to ascribe to Hamas tradecraft and how much to ascribe to failure of the Israel Defense Forces and the Israeli intelligence apparatus. The major increase in tradecraft seems to be that they kept it secret and that the training was secret. I'm not sure that Hamas thought it was going to have this much success. And I think maybe some of the reason for the brutality that we've seen in some of these videos is that they didn't think they were going to get this far in. And once I don't think they planned for what happens when we get this far in and all hell broke loose. Maybe that's me trying to rationalize something that is not rational and which is so disturbing. But I wonder if that had something to do with it. And I wonder if Hamas, had greater ambitions. But where do you put Iran into all this? Because you also would think if this was part of some grand plan, you would expect some synchronicity with Hezbollah's actions. There was none. Like, Hezbollah has fired off some rockets. I wouldn't say that border is calm right now, but they didn't do it over the weekend. It seemed to catch them by surprise too. It's not like Iran has done anything with its, proxies in Syria or proxies anywhere else to help Hamas at first. Now, maybe it's about drawing Israel in, and then they're going to hit them on these other fronts. Maybe that's the answer that you're going to give. But at least talk to me about, do you ascribe more weight to the intelligence failure or more weight to Hamas's tradecraft?
I think it's a bit of both. And look, there's a lot of blame to go around. Look, one of the shocking things was that they met no resistance. The fact that they were able to plow through so many different townships, go to this open air, this concert that was happening, this music festival, and just pick up people. You would think there would be more resistance. The reports that I've been reading and the commentary suggest that, the Israelis thought that, Hamas doesn't want to fight right now. And there haven't been, serious rocket fire from Hamas in 2 years. It's been from PIJ. Hamas is kept out of it. And apparently Hamas was sending, false signals that it wants work permits for its people and whatnot to come work, in Israel and ease the economic conditions. And the bigger thing, and, this is one of the things, I wrote a piece less than 48 hours before the attack in which I actually talked about why Saudi Crown Prince NBS is actually pushing so hard for a normalization deal with Netanyahu, knowing all the constraints and everything. I'm not sure if you saw his interview on Fox News. That was he was coming on pretty strong. And so if you look at it from that point of view, I basically said, look, from NBS's point of view, from anybody who's worried about Iran and its allies creating problems, the West Bank is of concern, including the Israelis. The West Bank is tanking. It's in meltdown mode. Abbas is 87 years old. He holds the PLO chairmanship, the PA presidency, and the leadership of Fatah. Okay, so they're going to be looking for successors, and there's already, massive infighting. The PA and Fatah and its bureaucracy is known to be very corrupt. And then you have Israeli annexation plans. You have settlements in there. So this place is about to blow. Or was about to blow. It may still blow. And that's a major concern for everybody who doesn't want to see Hamas leap out of the box called Gaza into the West Bank and exploit this. The Iranians would love to exploit this because this sort of is they're positioned well. There's Iraq, There is Syria, they're there. And, it doesn't take a whole lot to make their way. I mean, they've made their way into Yemen of all places, which is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. So you can't assume that, Iran and Hamas is not going to do this. So the Saudis were trying to work with Netanyahu. I heard MBS very carefully. He stopped talking about a state. And he said he wanted to make lives better for Palestinians. He's not talking about Gaza. He can't do anything about that because of Hamas. He was talking about the West Bank and to build some form of an insulation where they know they can't revive Fatah, into the vigorous thing that it once was, but some mechanism, some concessions on the part of the Israelis so that they can keep things going until they find a solution. This is a far cry from, hey, it's 2002, King Abdullah says, return to the 1967 lines and we will give you 22 states recognizing you and normalizing relations. So that's what sort of the context here. And I think now the Iranians have an imperative. There are multiple imperatives. First of all, they've been at the receiving end of, Israeli covert operations. Many of their scientists have been, eliminated. They've had attacks on their facilities. Then the viruses, going back to the Stuxnet thing, which is now almost 12, 13 years old. And the Iranians have not been able to respond effectively. On top of that, they lost Soleimani to the U.S., the guy who created, the entire constellation of proxies. And so they needed to respond. And otherwise, it's a credibility issue for Iran. If you're Hezbollah and you're Houthis and you're the Iraqi Shia militias, you're the Assad regime and the militias in Syria, you're looking at Iran and saying, they've got protests in their country, their economy isn't doing well, Khamenei is about to kick the bucket. And so can we rely on this? It's kind of similar to, everybody who's buddies with Putin, like Kadyrov and, Lukashenko and the Central Asian states that have relied on Russia, and now Russia tanking in Ukraine. So everybody's looking around saying, can we depend on these people? So Iran had an imperative to strike back, and this is the way it can only strike back, because Hezbollah would make it a much bigger war. They know that they've seen a pattern that, rocket fire, Israelis go in, nothing really happens, we're safe, low cost, high yield strategy. So I think that they probably spiced that up, juiced that up in order to, it back and say, hey, we're still in this game here. We're not a declining state. Last time you and I were talking, we were talking about the Iranians, looking at, the end days, if you will. And they may still be looking at the end days. I still believe that, but they still have this firepower that they can project influence. So I think that is the imperative there. And then this tradecraft and this capability, we know that it doesn't grow on trees. You can't, Google and you go on a YouTube video and find out how to set 1,000 people in and then, stage this attack. Yes, there's a lot of blame on the Israeli side for intelligence failure, security lapses and whatnot. But still, the ability of Hamas to pull this off has all the hallmarks and the playbook of the Quds force.
Yeah. I want to spend more time about Iran, but here's sort of a question that encapsulates both the West Bank, which that's a critically important point that people aren't talking about enough, but then also Iran. Do you think that what Hamas has done makes Hamas more popular in the West Bank? And then do you think that what Hamas has done, if it is sort of, a chess move here by Iran, does that make the Iranian government more popular? And I ask that question because in Iran, yes, the IRGC pushes these things, and yes, Iran has its proxies and things like that. But you also get protests sometimes in Iran about stop sending money abroad and take care of us at home. We don't care about these issues. We care about the fact that our economy sucks here and that you've isolated us and blah, blah, blah. And because of the way, how hard it is to get information out of Iran, it's never really clear, well, do more people think that or do more people support this in the grand scheme of things, and who are the vocal protesters? And sort of same thing with the West Bank. Are West Bank Palestinians going to look at this and say, wow, Hamas has really struck a blow for the Palestinian cause here, and maybe this is the time to rise up and get rid of Abbas and take back our lands or some sense of sovereignty for ourselves? Or do you think that could it backfire on Hamas? Could it be, well, that was a bridge too far? Like, they can see the videos just as well as everybody else, and they don't want to be associated with that. And they probably know that any concessions that were in the offering between MBS and Netanyahu, I mean, I don't think the word concession will be in an Israeli leader's mouth for a generation after everything that's gone on. So how do you think Hamas's moves plays for its popularity in the West Bank, and how does what Hamas has done play for the Iranian government's popularity with its own people?
So definitely there are enough people, lives are miserable. When lives are miserable and at scale, we're talking industrial strength. You're talking about millions of people who are miserable because of the occupation, and they've been completely disillusioned with Fatah, anything called a PA, PLO. And then you're looking for, who's fighting for us, and you'll take whatever it gets. And if you're miserable and you look at this happening to people who you see as the occupier, and who's occupying your land, and then you're saying, you know what, maybe that's the way. Maybe if Hamas was in the West Bank, then things would be different. Like, look, Hamas has been ruling Gaza from 2007 until now. Look how many wars they've fought with Israel. They've forced truces. They've got, they've maintained their own. And yes, people are suffering and there's a price to be paid and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they're not corrupt like, at the perception. I do believe Hamas is corrupt, by the way. But the perception amongst the people in the West Bank who see corruption every day, and I mean, I've been to the West Bank, and I mean, you have Audi dealerships next door to slums. So
yeah, I've also been to the West Bank, and I just it is stark how you can go by a villa and then the next street is like the third world. I mean, it's really
exactly.
very stark.
So people those people are looking at this and saying, maybe it's not such a bad idea. So yeah, I mean, they're gonna force me to pray and maybe ask my daughter to wear the hijab, or maybe not. I really don't like their radicalism, but at least they're speaking up for the Palestinians. That is the thinking among desperate people. So yes, Hamas is that part of the Hamas strategy, that if you do this, you'll become more popular. And it wasn't to just sort of they're in Gaza. They don't have to do anything. In fact, what they did has threatened their position in Gaza. But if they didn't do this, they were fine in Gaza. This is for projecting influence. They're looking at this opportunity of a lifetime. They've been trying to replace Fatah since the days of Yasser Arafat, since the days of the Oslo Accords, and they see themselves getting this chance. And they've been away from the West Bank since 2007, but they have their infrastructure, they have people down there. They just need to be able to make use of the vacuum. So yes, definitely they thought this would make them popular. Will they get popular? Well, I was listening to some Israeli former general on Voice of America. He was on the show before I got on this morning, and he made a point. He said, look, there are those in Gaza who just want to fight Israel. They think killing Jews is the way of life. Then there are those who are, that are saying, can I have a better life? Can I have schools? Can I have, clean water, nice homes and whatnot? And so I think that the latter category is going to still be circumspect, especially now. I think that if the death toll of Palestinians becomes huge, which I don't see how it won't. It's going to cost Hamas. It's going to cost Hamas popularity because you brought this onto us, and there'll be condemnation. So when you're winning, people side with you, but when you have a downturn, then it's funny how that same support sort of completely eviscerates, or at least good chunks of it. So there's that. The Iranians is a different story. The Iranians, you rightfully pointed out, are not seeking to be popular at home with this. This is then demonstrating to their proxies, their ecosystem in the region, that the mothership is alive and kicking, and you don't have to worry about anything. This is a message to the United States. This is a message to the Israelis. This is a message to the Saudis. By the way, I wonder how NBS is feeling right now, because I don't know if you recall, but like a couple of months ago, there was that much celebrated peace agreement between the Saudis and the Iranians, allegedly brokered by the Chinese. Mm-hmm. Well, they did that and then turned around and did this and torpedoed whatever efforts that NBS was making. So he definitely feels stabbed in the back. So this is a message to everybody that, hey, we are alive and kicking. If you think we're declining and whatnot, guess again. This is that. On the home front, in a very, very sort of paradoxical way, it's basically sending a message that we've, absorbed the protests. The regime has not fallen. And if we can go out and do this, then think of what we can do at home. So it's sort of breaking the morale of those. But having said that, there are what we call the hawks, the hardliners, the extremists, the radicals amongst the security establishment and the clergy, more in the security establishment than the IRGC and in its broader ecosystem. And not everybody in the IRGC, by the way, believes this way, but there's a good chunk of them. I would say at least half of the IRGC would probably be believing in this, that it's been too long since there was a war with it, that Iran got involved in directly. Mm-hmm. And the revolutionary fervor has gone down because we've become too comfortable. Even our own people now live in large villas and, they have the good life and whatnot. And the only way to revive this regime and keep it going and revive the quote-unquote revolutionary spirit is to have another war, because they look back at the Iran-Iraq war in which, the revolution was really crystallized. Because it was one thing to topple the Shah, it was another thing to fight and protect your regime and maintain, basically protect it and build this is a battle-hardened force, or at least used to be. So they see that another war, it may not be a bad idea. Yes, there's going to be a cost to pay, there's going to be a price to pay, but if there is a war from outside, we can deal with problems on the inside. Now, does everybody agree with them on that in the Iranian political and security establishment? I doubt it. So there will be, that back and forth. But the point is that even if they don't go to war, external tensions allow them to manage internal problems, or at least give them a way to deal with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the themes of all this is just how alive history is around us. Because it's demented to me that the Iran-Iraq war is something that you would want to return to. An incredibly bloody conflict, millions dead. That also gets backed into U.S. support of the Shah, and then the U.S. support of Saddam Hussein at the beginning, and then Saddam was crazy. So it really, you're just putting all the old greatest hits come out when you start talking about that and that relationship there. But in that case, then, what is next for Iran? For these hardliners or whoever's pulling the strings here, have they done what they wanted? Have they achieved their objective? Have they put the Israelis and Saudis on notice? Or is there another shoe to drop? Is it like I said, are they waiting for Israel to go in force in Gaza and then tap Hezbollah and say, okay, now it's time for you, and tap the factions in Syria and say, now it's time for you? That's sort of the doomsday scenario. Do you think that is coming, or do you think that they've made their point, and do you think that they are willing to sacrifice Hamas to make the point? Because I don't expect this generation of Hamas leadership to be alive for much longer based on what they've done.
Yeah, no. So there is this cost. So you helped Hamas and you praised Hamas for doing this. Okay. Now Hamas is getting clobbered, or will be getting clobbered. If you step aside, then you look like you betrayed them. Mm-hmm. So that is something that has a cost to it, to your reputation. So, but you can't sort of say, press the Hezbollah button, rockets are going to fire into Haifa and whatnot, and then press the Houthi button and something else happen. You can't do that. That's not the way it's going to be. I think it's much more nuanced. I think they're going to wait and see. I have a hard time believing that you and I have long talked about how even the most radical of actors make rational calculations. They're not bereft of rational calculations. If they are, then they're not much of a threat. If they don't, then they're not much of a threat. I have a hard time believing Hamas didn't know what they were setting themselves up for. I think that, yes, they may have been surprised. No one knows where they will be, until you actually execute. It's one thing to practice and prep and plan and plot. It's another thing to see what happens when you actually are in the battle space. So yes, there is an element of, hey, we did far better than we thought we would. We have, bin Laden on videotape saying this, that he didn't think that the World Trade Center buildings would come down. He just thought that they would be hit, and that's what they were aiming for. But, they came down and they benefited from that. So yes, there's all that. But there's also the element of, hey guys, we're going to be hit hard and not like anything we've seen before. So what's our plan? We have to have a plan. So I have to believe that there is some plan on the part of Hamas to hold out. Why do I say that? Because go back to 2006. Hezbollah had a plan when it, engaged, when it did that border skirmish and abducted those soldiers. And then we had the 2006 war, and Israel could not achieve its military objectives. I think that that's what they're going to try to achieve here. Much, much more difficult for Hamas, because we're talking a small area, not as, not a whole lot of battle space experience like the Hezbollah has had going back decades. But I think that that's what they're hoping. And I think Iran has helped them on that front as well. And prepare for that. But do they actually perform like they performed in this attack? We just have to wait and see. I think the Iranians will wait and see what happens, and then they may or may not, depending on how this goes. So, for example, let's just game this out like a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that Hamas continues to resist and this thing prolongs. In the meantime, you have hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians getting killed. And that creates an uproar in the region. I bet you Sisi right now is shaking in his legs, and so is the Saudi crown prince and everybody else, and Jordan's monarch as well. So if that happens, then you have a new dynamic in the region. Then you have, people protesting, and you can see protests in the West Bank, maybe even inside Israel. Who knows? And at that point in time, you can perhaps activate, Hezbollah mildly, throw some rockets in from kind of like what Saddam did to Israel in the 91 war, the Scuds that he was throwing in from Syria. You could see this happen. You could do something, the Houthis may do something on the Saudi border, and the militias in Iraq may do something targeting the U.S. forces. Who knows? I mean, these are sort of, scenarios. So it's not like they're going to just jump into this. They're going to wait and see. They're going to see how this thing goes and then act accordingly. Because they can't. One thing they can't do is just to say, "Oh well, it was nice knowing you, and we helped you, so now you're on your own." That just can't happen. I just don't see the Iranians doing that.
Yeah, the thing about the 06 and the comparison there that doesn't line up is that, in some ways, the thing that Hezbollah got most right was that they understood that Israel was not going to commit land forces to the battle, that Israel was going to try and rely on its air force and its artillery, and that it just wasn't willing to take casualties like it was in previous wars. And the reason I say it's sort of hard to compare that to this is because I don't think Israel cares about the casualties anymore. They took the casualties. So I think the gloves are off, and it's going to be, if you listen to Israeli military leaders right now, they're literally talking about flattening every single building in the Gaza Strip. They don't care if people have to live in tents for the next, 5 years. They're talking about, no place for Hamas to hide anymore. And if you do get that sort of incursion, you sort of have to wonder, well, are they going to open up a second front to try and help Hamas? The other flip side of this is, if Israel does that, and if Israel has quick success, which is not a foregone conclusion, this is going to be extremely hard, and I expect there are going to be a lot of casualties. Part of me wonders if Israel doesn't turn around, like once they've solved, let's say they can solve the Gaza Strip situation in the next 30 to 45 days, do they turn around and say, and Hezbollah, you're next? Like, we're not doing this anymore with proxies on our borders, and like we have the momentum and we're mobilized now. We're going to go after you next. I wonder if that's also in the threat matrix for some of these proxies.
Absolutely. And it's a good thing you brought that up, because something I've been thinking about as well, because right now, if you look at the U.S. posture, the U.S. is basically saying, is setting up the stage for that Israel has to go into Gaza. Nothing should disturb that. Who could disturb it? Iran and Hezbollah and, others. And so that's why there are two carrier groups now, at least planned. And that warning that stay out. Now, let's say that can the Iranians assume that the Israelis are going to be done? Right now, the Iranians cannot assume anything anymore, because they have done something. Even though, there was this really interesting statement from the IDF spokesperson. I forget his name. He's a major. He said something very interesting. He says, we don't have evidence that Iran was involved.
Right.
But we also didn't know that this was going to happen. We didn't have the intelligence beforehand. But what we do know is that, the Iranians aren't surprised at this. So that's very telling. And so if you are Iran, you're now wondering, is this just Gaza? Is it going to be Hezbollah? What are they going to do next? Are they going to, we don't know what's going to happen. So they have to assume worst case scenario. Like the Israelis cannot assume that we can just go into Gaza and Hezbollah will not fire rockets. So it's mutual suspicion right now. Mm-hmm. And so I think that this sort of, mutual security dilemma of sorts is making the situation worse. And therefore, Iran, whatever strategy it has, it could be that they wait and see. It could be that they, once they go in and they say, okay, let's take the pressure off of Hamas and do something here. I don't know when they will time it, but they can't just assume that, after Gaza's flattened, everything is okay. And that's something the Iranians cannot assume at this point. And neither can the Israelis think that, if we just eliminate Hamas, then we have an arrangement with, Hezbollah, that Hezbollah doesn't want to fight us. The Lebanese economy is bad, and they're tied up in Syria because I support the Assad regime, which is a shell of its former self, and therefore nothing's going to happen. I think all calculations are off right now on the part of both sides.
Yeah, and this is where the carrier battle groups from the United States become important, because if Iran is going to try to do this, you would think, based on, Biden, probably the strongest speech I've ever seen in support of Israeli foreign policy from Biden in the last couple of days. You also got to think that if something is going to happen, that the United States, like if Iran is going to try to make this a more regional conflagration, that the United States would be there and get involved, I would think, at some level, because it's sort of hard to imagine anything else happening. So I wonder if the United States is there and is trying to show its teeth a little bit in the region, because they don't want things to get to that level. And I don't know, that's sort of a dangerous place to go to for the United States. Are you hearing anything in Washington or inside the Beltway about where the U.S. is going to go there? I guess the last piece of that is, Biden's getting a lot of political flack for that prisoner exchange and the $6 billion. And Iran has been a terrible issue for the Democrats for a long time now, going back to the Obama administration. If Biden wanted to demonstrate some foreign policy credentials going into an election season, and if Iran does pick a fight here, you could sort of see the chain of events happening, even if Biden came in wanting better relations with Iran, if that sort of happens. So I don't know, take that in whatever direction you want.
I think that, so in the short term, the chaos for the Iranians beyond a certain magnitude the Iranians like to play subtle in the short term for towards a long-term radical rejiggering of the landscape. It took them forever to build Hezbollah. It took them forever to build the militias in Iraq. They had to wait for the U.S. to overthrow Saddam to activate the militias and get everything. And then they put everything in the kitchen, everything in the kitchen sink into Syria to protect Assad. But in the long run, the Iranians like chaos. This is what they feed off of. So if there's chaos, is the home turf secure? Is the United States going to come and bomb Iran? Okay. Well, no. If the fighting is in Lebanon, then okay, all right. What are they going to do? They can't. Hezbollah will survive. It'll become even more stronger. That's their calculus.
Well, but not to interrupt, but just to go right on that scenario. Let's say, again, hypothetical scenarios here. Let's say Israel goes in force, hundreds of thousands of troops in the Gaza Strip. Let's say Hezbollah opens up a second front. Let's say Netanyahu calls Biden and says, "I need help. Iran is backing Hezbollah to invade my country." Like, what does Joe Biden do there? Does he say, "Hey, we'll give you weapons, but that's your fight"? Does he start bombing Hezbollah positions because Netanyahu asks him to? Does he, make a threat to Iran? If you don't call back Hezbollah, we will treat you as responsible. Like that's a realistic scenario to me. How do you react to that?
I think they will. They will try to use the back channels to rein in Hezbollah. But if this is the read of the Biden administration, that the Iranians are in a provocation mood, and they're in an aggressive mood right now, then I don't think that he's going to stop. It may actually win him, a lot of political points to go after Hezbollah, and do some strikes. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be some strikes. The United States, we have the example of the Trump administration taking out Soleimani. We have U.S. airstrikes that happen in Syria. And so, it doesn't matter. This is a Shiite, Islamist group, and we've done it to the Sunnis. So, so what? I think that they'll do it. But it just depends on what the mood is, how they gauge what the intent of the Iranians is. If the Iranians are signaling through the back channels, hey, we don't want to fight, then they're not going to go there. And I think at this point in time, it's safe to say that those back channels are humming. And the U.S. is sending a message to the Iranians that, they're going to come after you. And if you stay out, then we can make sure this thing doesn't get bigger than it already is. But if you don't rein in Hezbollah, if you decide to activate Hezbollah, all bets are off. Right now, here's the thing. Israelis have done over the years some, things that were not thinkable. If you, the attack on the Osirek reactor in Iraq, the nuclear facility in Syria in 2007, the Entebbe raid, the killing of Abu Jihad in Tunisia. These are long-distance airstrikes that the Israelis have done. So honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the situation came to this, that the Israelis will pull back from even lobbing missiles at Iran right now, because this is it. Let's say you get rid of, the threat neutralize the threat in Gaza. Hezbollah is still there. Iran is entrenching day by day in Syria. It's already entrenched in Iraq. You have to draw a line somewhere. And the only way you're going to get their attention is you are not going to hide behind these arcs of influence, if you will. We can breach these arcs if we want to. So I'm saying all bets are off right now. That's why I said in the beginning, this is completely a different, we're in a different universe right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could have gotten more pessimistic, but somehow I am. You brought up Entebbe. I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this point, but I'll just say the lone casualty in the Entebbe raid that saved all those hostages was Yonatan Netanyahu. And I often, we talked about Sharon and his stroke and how that changed the course of history. I often wonder how Israeli history might be different if Yonatan Netanyahu was still alive and if it wasn't Bibi that was the one that was running things. Because I'm not going to shit talk Bibi too much, but Yonatan Netanyahu, a much more powerful and deeper thinker in general, and I think that was a big loss for Israel in the long term for thinking about these things. You mentioned Syria, and that is about as perfect a segue as we can make to the other elephant in the room that I think people aren't talking about enough, which is Turkey. Turkey, relatively quiet at the beginning of this. Erdogan has not been quiet in the last 24 hours. He talked about last week, at the end of last week, the United States shot down a Turkish drone in Syria. That was weird. Not a lot. Nobody said a lot about it. Erdogan's been talking about it for the last 24 hours and talking about U.S. military bases in Syria and exactly how many of them are. He's talking about the massacre in the Gaza Strip and how the violence must be stopped. I also, Turkey, an uneasy alignment with the Gulf and especially with Saudi Arabia. They were at loggerheads for a long time. Then, Turkey needs money. Mohammed bin Salman is happy to proffer it. But I can't imagine that Erdogan is going to go off the handle about Gaza without at least talking to MBS first. So I don't know, where is Turkey in all this? Because yes, like Saudi-Israel normalization, maybe this is delayed, maybe it's in jeopardy, maybe it was never going to happen in the first place. But Turkey and Israel have finally gotten back to normal relations in the last couple of years for the first time since the Mavi Marmara incident. And at least the way Erdogan's been talking for the last 24 hours, that also seems like it's in jeopardy.
So I think it's safe to say that when this happened, Erdogan probably said, "Oh shit," because this is not what he wanted right now. He's got a lot on his plate. He has just pushed into the South Caucasus with NK under Azerbaijan. He's trying to build that Zangezur corridor running from Azerbaijan proper through Armenia, through Nakhchivan into Turkey.
Yeah, and listeners, just so you know, we recorded with your colleague Eugene, and we're having a full episode about Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, and everything else is coming out early next week. So you preempted him because of the war, but we'll talk about what all those words mean in much more depth later on. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, so he's looking at the Black Sea, he's looking at the South Caucasus. He kind of said, you know what? Even the Ottomans didn't go into the Middle East when they first emerged. It took them hundreds of years to get into the Middle East. They focused on Europe. They focused on, becoming, looking at, the Black Sea basin and whatnot. So I think he's focused there. The reason I say that is he's kissed and made up with the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Egyptians, the Israelis, and I don't want to be supporting Muslim Brotherhood or anybody else. Syria is kind of a different story because we have a border. The Kurds are a threat, but okay, I'm willing to play nice. There's still Russia support for Assad, even though Russia is tanking. And I think if I'm Erdogan, I'm looking at Russia tanking, more closer to home. And how can I, as the Turks, benefit from a weakening Russia? I've already done this in the South Caucasus. Can we continue to build on this? And that's where the focus is. Then this happens. And now all of a sudden, I don't want to talk about this, but then I look bad because I used to talk about it and I was very passionate about it. Mm. And now I'll look really, really bad. I can't be, the true caliph of the Muslims in waiting. And I can't be, the successor to the, Ottoman Empire until I speak about these issues. And there's a huge Muslim constituency. I've done so many info ops, with that, Netflix series called Ertugrul, and people have eaten it up and they love me and they love everything. I can't just not say anything. So he's saying things. He's probably wondering, he's running, picking up his phone and making calls and saying, how can we prevent this from going completely south? I think that the U.S. knows that he has to do this. The media will get excited about it, and some analysts will get excited about it, that Erdogan is changing color again. But I will take you back to when Biden basically called him up and said, hey man, I'm going to go and declare tomorrow that, the Ottomans committed genocide against the Armenians, and it's going to be an official U.S. policy. I know you have to go and say what you have to say. No problem. Do what you have to do, but I got to do this, and I know you're going to understand. And what happened? Turkey huffed and puffed for 24 hours, and that was the end of it. The sky did not fall, and at least that was the impression that the Turks had given for decades, that if we never did any genocide, and if you do this, then this is a red line, and all hell will break loose. Nothing happened. I think that that's kind of what the same scenario right now. He has to huff and puff, but he also has to make sure that this thing doesn't get out of hand. It's a real conundrum for him, and he's probably very angry at the Iranians for doing this, though he can't show it. And he has to sort of join the, occupation, it's Israel. If Israel wasn't occupying, then this would have never happened. That kind of discourse. He's in a tough spot. He wants to be somewhere else, focused on the northern flank, but he's being pulled into the Middle East, and let's see what he does.
And I guess we're about to see just how strong that alignment of Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel is. It's getting tested very early, and maybe Iran wanted to test it early before it congealed too much. I've been talking about Egypt since the very beginning of the conflict. I mean, Egypt was the ruler of the Gaza Strip for a long time before the Israelis took it from them, and then before Hamas was a ruler there too. It looks like, when Netanyahu says, Gazans leave, the only place you can go is Rafah, the border crossing to Egypt, and Israel's been bombing the border crossing, and Egypt's at the border saying, "Don't even think about coming into our country. We don't want it." So I don't know. I second your thoughts about Egypt. It must be a very difficult situation. I have to say I would be a little bit nervous if I was Israel about where Egypt goes from here, because you better hope that Sisi has the situation under control, because if you got some kind of uprising on the Egyptian street against the Egyptian government for complicity in whatever's about to happen in Gaza, and if you got another rise in the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and things like that, I mean, I don't think that's likely, but on my scenario sheet, if I'm an Israeli decision maker, that's one of those low probability but high magnitude developments that could really screw things up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I think the Iranians and their allies gamed this out. Hamas gamed this out, saying, what's going to happen? How far, there are limits to how far Israel can push, because they don't want to see Egypt tank. And Egypt is going to get nervous about this. I do want to say that I think that at the very least, Israel wants regime change in Gaza, or at least regime collapse. And do they have, the U.S. has done regime changes and it's failed. It's always easy to topple an existing government. It's very hard to build an alternative. And for the Israelis, the problem is the PA isn't doing well. So even if you created the conditions to bring the PA back into Gaza with Egyptian help, it's not going to be easy. So this is going to be messy. But they're looking for the end of the Hamas regime, because it's become an intolerable security threat. And if you don't do it, then they keep growing. They have been growing. I mean, that's the Israeli. That would be the sort of the Israeli imperative. What does that do to Egypt? Well, Egypt. If you look at it, there are two ways to look at it. If you look at it, if you're a Sisi and you're saying, I have Muslim Brotherhood under lock and key, and it's been 10 years, and I want to get reelected. I just announced, a third term, bid, and I certainly don't want this. But this thing is an instability. This Hamas is an instability right on my border. It's causing more direct pain to the Israelis, not so much to me, but it's a long term. If they stay there, then at some point, it's going to have a ripple effect inside mainland Egypt. Yes, it's separated with the Sinai, and so there's some strategic depth there and buffer zone, but still. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is saying, do I want to sort of, shake this hornet's nest And that's what the Israelis are doing. They're actually destroying the hornet's nest, and the hornets are going to come out and they're going to come towards me.
Yeah.
And how am I going to deal with that? That's going to be difficult. I mean, I just don't know of what, maybe if the Egyptians, issue statements against Israel and then take care of refugees, maybe they can absorb it.
Well, I mean, the look on your face there says it all for why I'm so worried about Egypt, because they just don't have a lot of good options. And it's not just with this. Just think about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They haven't been able to protect their own interests with the Nile, so now they're going to have problems in the north too. And you just got to think, and that doesn't even get into rising food prices and how Egypt is super exposed to the Russia-Ukraine war because they have to import all this wheat and things like that. I mean, you start to stack on the challenges that Egypt is facing. And
Egypt is probably the Gulfies right now. They're probably saying, hey, we need help, more help. I mean, I know you've given us a lot of help. We need more help. Yeah,
well, I mean, the Gulfies have money. I don't know that they have that much money. I mean, that's, I don't know. So not a good answer there. But before we close, Kamran, I want to zoom out and maybe get a little more philosophical and take advantage of your expertise, not just on the Middle East, but on the Muslim world in general. Because there is more to the Muslim world than just the Arab world and the Middle East and the Levant in particular. And I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, you're from more of a Pakistan, South Asian milieu, if you will, but how is this going to play in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Pakistan, in other Muslim majority countries in the world? Do you think there is a backlash against Hamas? Do you think there is a backlash against Israel and the West, and that those things get conflated together? How do you think that the rest of the world outside of the crucible of the Middle East, and specifically the Muslim world, is going to look at this? Is this a new battleground now between East and West and Muslim and Judeo-Christendom and all these other things? Or am I making too much of it? I'm just curious what your finger on the pulse there is telling you.
Well, you've asked me a question that I will answer. And, I know some of my Muslim friends are going to get upset with me for saying this, but so be it. I mean, I have to say what is true if we're going to be philosophical. Look, I think that there is a problem in the way this thing is framed in popular Muslim imagination, and it's across borders. There is a lack of recognition that, hey guys, if Hamas, Iran, and Hezbollah did not pull this off, the situation was bad, but it didn't have to go to worse. Okay. So yes, the situation has always been bad. There's an occupation. The Palestinians have been suffering for decades, at a multi-generational level. That's all true. But, this thing that we're in right now, the situation going from bad to worse, is because of a specific incident. There's very little introspection on that. And that's sort of my critique of the broader Arab Muslim milieu, that, hey, look at this geopolitically. Did Hamas know that Palestinians are going to be killed in large numbers because of what they're doing? Yes. But they went ahead and did it. That means that is acceptable to them. That is a loss, that is a cost that is acceptable to them. And we know the Iranians don't care about anybody. For them, these are all cannon fodder. These are all proxies. These are all chess pieces that are to be moved around and played with and exploited for their own national interest. Yes, there's the Islamist ideology and whatnot, but, at one point, their ideology is kind of like a little overblown, because interests, we forget about interests when we talk about ideology. The Iranians are willing to sacrifice anybody. This kind of thinking is not there. And when they look at, and you see this is almost like, rinse and repeat kind of thing. It happens all the time. Every time we've seen, at least since, let's just start in 2008, Operation Lead Cast, Cast Lead. And so since then, you see this all the time, that we go back, you said the public conversation in the Muslim world goes back to they forget about it. They're in sort of this, the Palestinians in the interregnum between those, wars. It's in the back of the mind. It's a back of the collective imagination. And every now and then somebody will say anything about it, but it gets sensitized, and naturally so. And all of a sudden it becomes the thing, and as if the sky is falling. And then when it ends, people move on to other things. So there's no sort of, hey, why is this happening all the time? Where did it start? There's no introspection. And I think that's sort of where, which allows Hamas the oxygen that it needs, which allows this sort of, it's not just Hamas as an actor, but this sort of ideology and this sort of only looking at it as, Israel backed by the United States and the Europeans are, completely disregarding the Palestinians. That's true that the West does not pay so much attention to the Palestinians, but it's not black and white. It's, does the idea that the United States is constantly trying to, undermine the Palestinians and support the Israelis is one of those conspiracy theories. And there's a lot that the U.S. is going on for itself. And even, the idea that, it's hard work to suppress people, Why would you not do it if, it's not, people aren't doing it because frivolously. It's not happening frivolously. There are, interests at stake. There are threat perceptions, and there are multiple factors that go into the making of a decision. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the conversation sort of goes into a loop, and we're in that loop again. I mean, I see some of my WhatsApp groups start to hum and along the same frequency and wavelength, and it's that song on repeat, for the long term.
And I guess in that sense, it's not going to change, I guess, from your perspective.
No, I mean, I think that this is something that one of the things is that there is no good solution that would provide, that would address the Palestinian issue, that the Palestinian desire for self-determination, the Palestinian right to have a state of their own, it's not happening. And there are those, who have come to terms with it. There are plenty of people who support Palestinians, but they recognize the constraints. But the voices that are much louder or more vocal are those who don't understand that, and they just jump into a frenzy until the conflict is over, and then until next time. Again. So it's just cyclical, and I don't think that that's going to change unless there's some substantive change on the part of the Palestinians. Now, the issue is that the leadership of the Arab world, the leadership of the Muslim world, I mean, we talked about how Erdogan wants to be seen as this leader of the Muslim world. I mean, he's not been able to deliver anything for the Palestinians. It's not because he hasn't tried or doesn't want to. It's because he can't. I mean, this is not easy. We're talking land here, and the land is small, and the land is occupied by demographies that have fought with each other for decades. Those memories don't go away. The hostility doesn't go away. And then there are people who are manipulating it. There will be Al-Qaeda's, the ISIS, the Irans of this world, and then there are interests of Arab states. I mean, it's funny how I hear every time something happens in the Palestinian territories, you have, it's the same song coming from King Abdullah II in Jordan, that we need to have a Palestinian state unless there's a Palestinian state. And you know why he's saying that? Because more than half of his country is of Palestinian origin. He doesn't want his country turning into a Palestine. And that's been sort of the thing that's haunted the Hashemites since, the earliest days of the kingdom. And they can't forget Black September. And so there you have it. Egypt, we already talked about Egypt. They don't want this problem. They got their own problems. The Saudis want to export oil and continue to go into the 21st century in an age where climate change is becoming a thing and they're wondering, how they're going to adjust their economy to that. He has 32, 35 million people, and times are changing. So he has to worry about that as well. So there is no solution, and that frustrates people. But people don't understand this and don't take comfort from it. I take comfort from analysis and say, okay, I wish I could do something about these things, but there's not a damn thing I can do because of X, Y, Z, because I analyze. And that sort of says, hey, maybe if I just analyze and present and try to explain how things are and how they're likely to be, then maybe that's my job in all of this. I don't have to sort of go out and scream and be in a protest movement and whatnot, because those they help people deal with their frustrations. But that's pretty much it. I hope I'm making sense.
You are, and it's why we're kindred spirits. But I can't help but think, analysts are no more use here. Like it is now war. Like to the extent that analysts have any power or that words have power, like those things have failed, and now the rules are off. So on that depressing note, Kamran, I'm sure we'll have you back on soon. Thanks for making the time on what is a very, very busy week to share your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.